Hey everyone, I hope you are having a nice Friday. Hopefully by now you have read the directions for your first essay assignment, the personal narrative essay. As you remember, what you're going to be doing in this paper is writing about a person who has had a significant impact on you, someone in your life who has shaped the kind of person that you are today. In this video, I want to talk about two things that you want to make sure you include in that narrative essay to make it effective. Those two things are vivid detail and narrating strategies. So we're going to talk about how to create vivid detail to make your essay memorable, and we're going to talk about what narrating strategies are and why you need them. So let me go ahead and move out of the way here. So I'm going to take you through a brief presentation on these two important components of your narrative essay, vivid detail and narrating strategies. So let's start with vivid detail. Vivid detail can do a couple things. It can make your essay more memorable and powerful. It can help you create what we call a dominant impression. This is a particular mood or atmosphere created through the description in your paper. Now, there's three techniques for creating vivid detail. To create vivid detail, you should use 1. Something we call naming and detailing. This just means that in your paper, in your descriptions, you're identifying concrete nouns and using adjectives to describe them. So what's a concrete noun? It's something that you can see and touch, like a car, a dress, a tomato. That is different than what we would call an abstract noun, which is something like summer. You can't really touch summer, you can't really see it, but it's still a thing. That's what we call an abstract noun. So when we're thinking about naming and detailing, we're focusing on describing concrete nouns and using adjectives, descriptive words, to describe them. So that's the first technique, naming and detailing. The second technique, similes and metaphors. You've probably heard of these things, maybe you've used them in your writing before. So these are figures of speech which compare two unlike things. So what's the difference between a simile and metaphor? Well, simile uses like or as to show the comparison. For example, her hair was as white as the first snow in January. So the two things I'm comparing, hair and snow. And then on the other hand, a metaphor, this is an implicit comparison, meaning it's implied. There's no as or like in this sentence. The clouds were puffs of cotton candy. So describing clouds in the sky and cotton candy, which is really making me hungry right now. So those are examples of similes and metaphors, and they can help make your writing really memorable. Now, one thing to keep in mind, sometimes a simile or metaphor doesn't really work well. And it doesn't work well if you're comparing two similar things. Like if you're comparing one kind of car to another kind of car, that doesn't really work. The key is the two things you're comparing have to be very different, like hair and snow or clouds and cotton candy. So they need to be very different things for a simile or metaphor to work. Now I'm going to jump in here real quick and say, I'm not going to go through your essay and count, okay, does this person have 4 similes and 3 metaphors? No, there's not a certain number that you need to have, but probably the most effective papers will use one or a couple really carefully created similes or metaphors, okay? So just keep that in mind. All right, I'm going to get back out of the way and continue on with our presentation. So those were 2 techniques for using vivid detail. Now, our third technique for creating vivid detail, to use sensory description other than sight. So what other senses can we describe in addition to sight? Well, we can describe what we touch, what we physically feel. We can describe what we hear, what we smell, or what we taste. When you're writing about this person in your essay, it might be helpful to create this impression of them that talks about maybe the kind of cologne or perfume they used to wear that you remember smelling, or describing the pitch of their voice and what their voice sounded like. So those could be important things for helping you to create your description of your significant person in your essay. Now, let's turn to narrating strategies. This is the other thing that you want to make sure you have in your paper, in addition to the 3 vivid detail techniques. So narrating strategies, these are things that help you tell a coherent story. So if you're describing an event that involves this person in your story, you want to keep in mind a couple things. First, somewhere in your paper, you need to use what we call clock or calendar time. This is just precise dates and times which present a clear sequence of action and indicate when a specific event occurred. So for example, in your paper, you might say in the late afternoon, or one night at 12:30 a.m., or a week before Christmas, 2 years ago in the middle of June. Your readers need to have some context for when something happened. So use dates and times to help your reader get a sense of what the timeline is in your story. Okay? So that's 1, clock calendar time. Number 2, narrating strategies. Number 2 is temporal transitions. So temporal means relating to time. A transition shows how things relate to each other. So temporal transitions are transitional words that show how events relate to one another in time. They're just simple words like first, during, afterwards, then, immediately, while, finally, a few minutes later. So you get the idea. You want to carefully include some of those when you're telling a story about your person so readers know what was the sequence of events, how did things happen. It helps your readers understand rather than be confused. So those are the first 2 narrating strategies. The third one, so you can tell by my dramatic picture here on the slide, specific narrative action. This means you are using action verbs, and action verbs are words that show people or things doing something. So you use action verbs and modifiers or describing words like adverbs that present action vividly. In other words, you are trying to recreate the sights and sounds of people in motion. Here's an example. As we raced down the stairs, I turned sharply at the bottom and threw myself toward the presents underneath the Christmas tree. I grabbed one gift and tore at the paper. My father sipped his coffee slowly and grinned as he watched the scene unfold in front of him. So you can see with the underlined verbs, those are all action verbs. So they are describing this Christmas morning when the narrator raced down the stairs and started tearing into their presents. So that's the kind of specific narrative action that you might want to capture in your paper as well. And then finally, narrating strategies. The 4th one, dialogue. Dialogue gives us the exact words that someone said, and we put them in quotation marks, that help capture the relationship between people. So you might want to have some dialogue in your paper to show how your relationship evolved or what it was like with the person that you're writing about. So this could be an example in someone's paper. She said, "Hold on a minute, buddy." You can imagine the kind of person who would say that, "Hold on a minute, buddy." It gives you some insight into their personality. Here's another example. He grimaced and murmured, "Doesn't look good." She yelled, "Didn't I tell you to clean up your room?" So those examples of bits of dialogue in your paper can really help your readers see and hear the scene that maybe you remember having, the conversation you remember having with the person that you're writing about. And finally, the last thing that we want to add into our discussion of vivid details and narrating strategies is anecdotes. Maybe you've heard of this word before. An anecdote is a short story about a particular incident on a certain day that illustrates something about the person whom you're writing about. So anecdotes are really important to have in your paper. You want to use vivid detail and narrating strategies when you are giving an anecdote in your narrative essay. So I would imagine that in your narrative essay, you're probably going to have a really long anecdote or a couple shorter anecdotes that take up entire paragraphs, because those specific stories, the anecdotes, those give us the insights into the kind of person who it is that you're writing about and the way that they've had a profound impact on you. So using anecdotes in your paper is really important. So vivid detail, we want to make sure that we have vivid detail to make your paper memorable and powerful. We want to make sure that you have narrating strategies, that help readers make sense of what is happening as you describe it. And then finally, we want to use that vivid detail and the narrating strategies when we describe the anecdotes, these short stories about the person that you're writing about that give us some insight into who they are. So these are all really important things to keep in mind. And later today, you're going to be doing a little bit of brainstorming on 3 possible people that you might want to write about in your paper. And part of that brainstorming is to think of a couple vivid details for each one that help us see this person as if we were right there and knew them just like you did. So you'll read more about that in the directions for the discussion board that is due today. If you have any questions about any of the stuff that we covered in this presentation, you can always rewatch it. You can always send me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. All right, thanks everybody. Hope you have a good rest of your day.